get across the pond to the UK where we meet and greet one of its illustrious sons, Patrick Graham, UK men's rights activist, with whom we'll engage on the critical issue of false allegations. Hello, welcome everyone to this, our 228th episode of Open Up, a live podcast simulcasted on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, where we engage with knowledgeable and influential individuals on critical topics impacting men and boys and our society at large. Hi, my name is Dipchand Ramcharitar, Director of Outreach and Development at Voice of Men 360. We are based in London, Ontario, Canada, and essentially we advocate for and support men and boys, though we reach out to other demographics as best we can. We are affiliated with International Men's Day, who operate internationally in a similar capacity. Before we get to Patrick, here's our disclaimer, followed by a couple of important announcements. We would like to remind everyone that Voice of Men 360's mission is always delivered in good faith with the intent of peaceful harmony for all. The views and opinions shared by the participants are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Voice of Men 360. Please know that our content is not a substitute for professional, medical, or therapeutic advice. If you're struggling with personal challenges, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a qualified expert. For questions or concerns about today's episode or any of our content, please feel free to email us at info@voiceofmen360.org. And now for a couple of important announcements. First of all, the Canadian government has launched a nationwide campaign to improve the health of men and boys. You can see the link flashing on your displayed on your screen right now. And the Canadian government, that they want to hear directly from the public. This is a real opportunity to influence policies and programs that affect men, boys, and families across the country. Please take a few minutes to complete the questionnaire that you would find on this website. That's now, as I said, on your screen. Your input is critical. Without it, key perspectives will be missing from the conversation. And what do you know? The deadline is actually tomorrow, June 1st. So, but you still have time. So please do your part to ensure that this gets done. Also, if you're a man involved in caregiving for an autistic child, adult, or family member, we want to hear from you. Again, you can see the related link on your screen right now. We are gathering input on the topics, challenges, and experiences you'd like to see covered in men's support and discussion groups. Your responses will directly shape future sessions and make sure they address what matters most to you. All responses are anonymous and confidential. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey. The deadline is June 30th, 2026. Your voice will help build the support that caregivers actually need. The link was on your screen as you would have had access to it at that time. And now, a warm welcome to today's esteemed guest, Patrick Graham. Patrick, why don't you start off by introducing yourself, including your background, and tell us what set you on the current path, if anything. Patrick.
For that, yes, my background is I grew up as a vicar's son and Anglican priest's boy, the youngest of four, and I've had a mixed career with being in the film industry as a sound recordist and being a mental health development officer and social worker and social work manager. And this all started for me, this journey I'm now on, very soon after I was made redundant at the age of 61 in 2016. There was a knock on the door at 8:15 in the morning, and I was immediately told I was being arrested And
Wow.
I had no idea what for. It took them a while to even say that it was connected with crimes of a sexual nature. So it was a complete shock. I had to go get dressed under supervision while they took all my computers, my wife's computers as well, and drove me from my home in Gloucestershire, an hour and a quarter's drive to Cardiff, where I used to live, and straight into the cells, belt and shoelaces gone. You know, it was all very speedily done and shoved into solitary confinement in a cell for the next 3 hours with no explanation whatsoever, which was pretty terrifying, I'd have to admit. And it does soften you up for when they actually do get you out and do the processing and fingerprints and photographs, and then sit you down and interview. And they tried to suggest in as many ways as they possibly could that I did do this thing to some young woman 25 years previously. And they kept asking me what I remembered. And I said, well, not much from 25 years ago. It's, you know, detail is missing. But they had me down as being at these weird parties, sex parties, and kept repeating the questions until my brain started to go, well, maybe I was drunk and I didn't remember this, and all these, and they were encouraging that idea all the time,
Right.
that I'd forgotten. But I did say there was no way I'd done this. It's not in my nature. You know, I've just been an active campaigner against all sorts of sexual abuse. I've supported women's groups and all sorts of other things. I couldn't understand what was going on. But during the next year, when I was, first of all, bailed to return and bailed again, it gradually dawned on me that they were deadly serious. They weren't letting up. And then they brought me in and actually laid charges that I had fingered this girl when she was 11 years old. And in fact, I only very vaguely knew her because she was the daughter of an admin worker that I used to manage, an admin worker that I didn't get on with very well at all. And so I started to put things together. And after the charge came through, I did probably the best, wisest thing. I told everyone in my family, friends, because before then I hadn't told a soul, and the pressure was immense. I could remember that feeling of it could all go away and I don't need to tell anyone. But as soon as they charge you, in this country at least, that's all in the public realm. So
Right.
There were TV cameras watching us come out of the courtroom where we had the charges read out to us, you know, because there were 5 of us, not just me. It was 5 of us that were accused, some of quite outrageous things. But all across that time, I was becoming more and more aware, because I then, after I was charged, I went to a men's victims of false allegations group called falselyaccused.me.
Right.
And it was a Facebook group. And even then it had 600 members. I think it's gone up dramatically since then. And I realized that what was happening to me was not rare at all, was happening a lot, right across the country and, of course, internationally, although I didn't know that then. I was way too focused in on my own issue. But when we did our own investigations and we had someone very good find out that this woman had actually done this same type of false accusation 7 times before,
Right.
in 3 different police areas. And yet the police hadn't apparently noticed that at all, made no record of it. Anonymous every time, of course, in law. So the police don't keep a record. And that's something I'm campaigning for. They need to keep a record of all accusers where they don't get a conviction, even to see whether there's a repeat pattern going on. But when it was thrown out, my response was to make a film about it. So I did, and it was named after the phrase that Keir Starmer, as Director of Public Prosecutions, embedded in the police force at that time, which is "we believe you." Police detectives were instructed to believe the victim, in inverted commas, even though, of course, it's an allegation. And if it's a false allegation, the real victim is me as the accused person. Yeah. But that's not how they see it. They jump straight to the idea, excuse me, they jump straight to the idea that you automatically believe this accuser, she's the victim, or he. There are quite a few males who come forward as well. And so I got used to the fact that the system was really biased against justice right from the start, right from the off. And yeah, making that film was therapy for me. So that was a help for me, but it was also my way into really campaigning. A lot of people wanted to see the movie, many more than wanted to be in it. I don't blame all those men who didn't want to be in the movie, because it's an instinctive reaction. If I keep my head down, it's better than being full publicity. But thank you so much, those men and women, or two women, who were very heavily involved. And because by doing that, they were helping to illustrate that these things are not rare. They're very common. And the trauma is always there. Every time there's the trauma. It's major, and it gets minimized by the sort of feminist dominated discourse online and everywhere, where they try and make out false accusations are vanishingly rare. Police officers say this all the time.
Right.
All of that did it for me.
Yeah, I can well imagine, and I am so sorry that you had to endure such horrifying experience, and all those like yourself who have had a similar experience. My thoughts, my heart, and everything go out to you guys. And I know this must be a very difficult thing for you to come forward and get out there in the public. So we appreciate you, having the spirit and the courage to do so. And when it comes to that, so keeping on the subject of the stigma, when we talk more about the permanence of the stigma, when someone is falsely accused of sexual assault and later found not guilty, their life is almost never returned to normalcy. They're often treated as a pariah, and in practice, their reputation, their career, and relationship never recover. How could the government, including the justice system, social media platforms, and society at large on the whole, attempt to correct this injustice? And while we're on that, what's failing now that allows a non-guilty verdict to leave a person socially condemned for life?
Well, it is, I think in some ways there's a small comfort in having a court say you are not guilty. But there are two groups of the not guilty, those like us where it's thrown out for reaching that conclusion. Although ours was very near to full trial, there are those which collapse during trial, and there are many, many more, at least in this country, that collapse during the process of investigation post-charge. And in some ways, I feel that's worse, because you can't hang anything on a not guilty verdict, even though people will always manage to say, yeah, well, he probably got off on a technicality, we still think he's guilty. The police certainly do that. They don't like losing. They want a result, as they call it, all the time. And the public have this basic attitude, I think, that comes from wanting to be on the "we all hate racists" gang. Not rapists, really. We all hate rapists gang, although we hate racists too. They love jumping on those bandwagons of proving how good they are at being very anti what they call the villains, but with no attitude of, oh, if he's not guilty, I might have to give him the benefit of the doubt. They hate that. So it's a really tricky task to undo that once it's done. It's interesting that one of the things I did, which my lawyers that I spoke to afterwards said, you did a brilliant job there. And I said, oh, did I? How? He said, well, what I did was I got the Times and the Daily Mail to write up our story when it was dismissed as she was a serial fantasist. They've done this loads of times before. What that means is that the publicity of the Times and the Mail meant that when anybody in the future, from now until eternity, Google's searches our name online and sex crime, the first thing that comes up is innocent because of serial fantasy, mad woman, you know. Right. Whereas for most of the people who go through this, who don't get that headline, the search comes up when anyone's searching their name and sex crimes, charges. They were charged. So that immediately is like a guilty verdict right there. And as far as job searches go, that's your job application thrown in the bin. So you can see how damaging it is. They say in our country, I don't know if you say in Canada or wherever else as well, the process is the punishment. It really doesn't matter that you get found not guilty. The punishment has already happened.
Yeah.
Your job's gone, your friends quite often gone, you know, your prospects, career, all sorts of things. Some of the stories in my film, the guy who had a dead cat left on his doorstep and VT'd all over his house. You know, I've dealt with people who've had to change not just schools for their accused young boy, but actually move town, change their whole where they live because of false allegations that were proven false.
Yeah,
but it's still too late to do anything about it.
True. It doesn't matter. Sorry, Patrick. I didn't mean to cut you off. Continue.
It's okay. Well, yeah, that's my main beef. I mean, we know that in theory the police are supposed to investigate without bias, and they're supposed to look at evidence that points away from the suspect as well as towards. In practice, they just don't do that. I've yet to come across a case, and I've spoken to loads of policemen. They get a case presented to them that's got your one key witness, nearly always in sex crime cases, just the one key witness, a suspect, and a court system that says we will believe what this person says, no need for any other forensic or any other evidence. You can still find someone guilty on the basis of that one person's testimony. There's no other crime in the world, I think, where that can hold true.
Right.
That's a real problem, because we are forced to prove our innocence. And as any lawyer will tell you, proving a negative is not a viable proposition.
Yeah, it's not a whole lot of fun. And I can see from what you're saying there, obviously, that this is a horrendous thing, first of all, to deal with. And secondly, the repercussions follow you regardless of whether you're proven innocent or not. I remember distinctly started in North America with the Me Too movement, Time's Up movement, and all these different things, where due process is thrown under the bus, which I don't understand, but that's something that we have had to deal with for a number of years. And I think the Johnny Depp trial sort of softened the blow a little bit. I don't think it's done enough, but it certainly helped a bit. But the question is, as the people on the opposing side like to say, oh, those are just a few instances, and the amount that goes unpunished, it doesn't matter. And you can't look at any sort of justice in that light. You know, everything should be based on merit, as far as I can tell. and based on that, people should be given a free, not a free, a fair trial as to whatever they're accused of. So for whatever, obviously what you dealt with and many other people, and the stigma that follows is almost impossible to even comprehend. But that's something that, people have had to deal with over the years. Now, keeping on the same subject, and I think you've touched on this before, but when it comes to the branding aspect, what steps are you taking personally, either through legal work, advocacy, public engagement, research, and writing, to help falsely accused reclaim their lives and to push for the appropriate, and this is also important, appropriate accountability for malicious false allegations?
Well, yes, of course, I've tried to tackle all of those things one time or another. Tried to sue the police to get monetary compensation for what was, a terribly failed approach, where the detective made good friends with this accuser, and totally trusted her and let her wrap around her finger, really, and did all sorts of very, very questionable things, including 1,000 emails to and from each other, 1,000 emails, several of which began written by the detective, "Hi, hun," smiley face. I talked about this at the International Men's Conference in 2018, soon after the case was dismissed. And I had, of course, to try and keep it anonymous, because the law says it's in contempt of court to do anything that might not protect this poor, innocent little victim from having a name pushed around. So the campaign really has been through awareness raising, and the film was a big part of that. Being a member of FACT, Falsely Accused Carers and Teachers, as it was called now,
Right.
And several other groups that I've worked with, FASO, and there's several British groups, I'm sure you've heard of most of them, that I've worked with in supporting others who have just discovered this. Of the approximately 40,000 men in a year, the last couple of years, who have been falsely accused, a good quarter of those get through to some sort of support mechanism.
Right.
So that's what I try and encourage and work with. And I've also done plenty of pieces for social media, interviews. And I was on the sit down with Pearl Davis.
Yeah, I know Pearl Davis.
With Mike Buchanan, who's Justice for Men and Boys, who was very heavily involved in the men's conferences, with Paul Elam, I'm sure you know.
Yes.
And many others. And yes, Janice Fiamengo I've worked with, and many others who are really good. There are some great women out there who have understood and grasped all this and understand where the problems are really lying. So I've learned off them some of the things they say in, for example, going after the most extreme feminist man-hating types. I can't really take them on, because as a man, I'm instantly blocked, instantly dismissed. Whereas women can say something and they can't use that instant block without looking like an idiot. So that's what I like to see. I will try and support women in doing more of that sort of work, because I think that's really more powerful when it comes from women. And ultimately, there are probably 80 to 90% of women in the world who feel like Janice Fiamengo, and only 10-15% who feel like the very loud, man-hating, all men are rapists sort of jargon that they bat around as if it doesn't hurt anyone. And they think that false allegations are not important. Not that they make quite a few men commit suicide, including one in fact two that I was in contact with trying to get support for, heartbreaking cases. And on the other side of that, I supported one guy who for years was sobbing stories to me, and then suddenly I found out that he told someone else that he had actually done it, this crime. And when I confronted him with that, he said, yeah, I'm sorry, I did. He's in jail now. But that felt like a terrible betrayal. You know, I built up a sense of trust because he'd gone into many repeat details over many years, and it was all lies. So you do have to be aware that there are liars on both sides as well. But yeah, my mission is for truth, not for one side over another. It's just a mission for truth.
Yeah,
it's very biased.
Yeah, and that's the way to go. You know, seek out the truth. Obviously, there are some cases where the truth applies to one demographic much more than the other. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And as you just mentioned, one of the areas we have to seriously consider and keep in mind is that of the genuine cases. So it's important to acknowledge that genuine sexual assault cases do exist. We want to make sure that we put that out there. And reforms aimed at false allegation must not come at the cost of those victims being disbelieved or undeserved. How do you balance, and this is very important, how do you balance the push for remedies for the falsely accused with the need to protect and support real victims throughout the process?
I think I'm possibly better placed to talk on this topic than almost anyone else I can think of, because as well as having been through the false allegations, I went with my two daughters through their pursuit of their stepbrother, who sexually assaulted and attempted to sexually assault both, did assault my youngest when she was 17 and he was 37, and also tried it on with my married daughter when she was 26, but she fought him off and gave him a good smack. But they decided to go through the court actually against my advice, because even though they resisted that for a long time, I've told them that going through the court is hell. As a rape victim, I understand why so many, in fact, I think in Britain, the figures are of 100,000 women raped each year, which is a fairly steady figure over the last 3 decades. Of those 100,000, something like 80 to 85,000 or more don't go to the police. And I don't blame them, because that is hell. They got to relive their trauma. They get questioned quite heavily, especially if they can't remember very well and things are vague, which people who are traumatized, that's often the case.
Yeah.
Whereas the 14,200 that do go to the police, hats off to them. The guts and the courage to go through all that and try and pursue it, and many of them don't get justice at the end of it, including my two daughters, by the way. It's hell and you get no reward. That's quite a thing to watch out for. But there are some people who go through and yes, guilty people are found guilty, or they admit guilt halfway through. That's the best result for most of those genuine victims. But, it's easier for me to tell the difference now because I've been studying it so hard. It's fascinating to note that most of the fantasists, the ones who've got either they want revenge on a man for some reason, post-date or whatever, or they're covering up having an illicit affair to their live-in partner, and they've been out and had sex, and they realize it's going to be discovered, so they invent a rape story. Then there are just the fantasists who want the drama of being a victim, money chasers because there's compensation in it. All of those people, they love to tell gory details in their stories to the police. They love to put in something that's going to get the police going, ooh, because that hooks the police in. The genuine rape victims that I know, and I am married to one, the genuine rape victims that I know, they would never have that gory detail in their story to police. They don't want to go there. It's a deliberately perhaps blocked, but sometimes unconsciously blurred memory. And the police don't like those cases so much because they find them less convincing, which is an irony. So they take the bad cases as more convincing than the real cases, quite often. Not
Yeah.
always, but quite often.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's balancing out all of this is tricky when the police drive is not helpful. It's that their drive to generally set up the suspect as convictable rather than investigating for the truth. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help real victims at all.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because, again, on one hand, you have actual victims. On the other hand, you have actual people falsely accused. And so sometimes it's a he said, she said situation. And it can be incredibly difficult to prove one way or the other. So we have to keep that in mind. But sometimes there are common trends. And I still maintain that merit should apply in every single case. And the court should put the interests of justice first before anything else, and not based on some agenda to drive a certain narrative in some direction to fulfill some political ideology. So we have to keep all these things in mind. But definitely, we want to emphasize again that we do respect and empathize with actual victims who have been through this tremendous debacle. So, it's hats off for people like yourself who come out there and address the situation based on truth and nothing else. And speaking of truth, we come across a situation when it comes to false allegations. It's reported. I think I don't know how accurate the statistics are of 2 to 8% of false reporting. The legal system often treats false allegations with lighter consequences than the life-altering damage the accused face. Now, in custody and divorce disputes, allegations are also sometimes weaponized as leverage. What's driving this mismatch, and what safeguards would make it harder to weaponize the process without deterring genuine victims?
Well, of course, I know those statistics well, and I know that 2% actually goes all the way back to 1984 and a book by Susan Brown-Miller. And she has admitted under interview that she plucked it from the air, the 2%. There's no research to back that. And in fact, it was prior to that, quite a lot of the women's groups were saying that it was zero. And then they realized that people only needed to know one case to make that look ridiculous. So they plucked 2% instead. But the figures, I go on British figures, which I suspect are more closely echoed across the world than people say. But we know from police office statistics how many rapes are reported to the police. We know from the National Office of Statistics survey, which is done every 2 years,
right,
roughly how many women are raped every year. And we also know from them how many of those go to the police. And those last two figures, which is 100,000 victims, of which only 14,000 go to the police. So that tells you that should be 14,000 victims gone to the police, 14,000 rape reports, but there were 82,000 rape reports. Ooh, how could there be 82 when there's only 14,000 rape victims gone? I wonder how many false accusations are in that 60,000 plus group. It's a farce. It shouldn't be allowed. But yeah. And my friends who are police officers, mostly retired detectives who I talk to online, they say, when I said I reckon it's 60% of false allegations, they say, nah, 75 to 90. That was their estimate.
Wow.
75 to 90% they reckoned of all the reports they get. including an example, one that I really enjoyed listening to, is a woman who said she was sexually assaulted by the entire French rugby squad in a London hotel
Right.
on this certain date. And on that certain date, the entire French rugby squad was in Fiji, which is a pretty good alibi. But yeah, those are the extreme cases. The ones that I get upset about are the divorce, where it's a reward from legal aid. They get financial aid if they could claim this. It can be domestic violence or sexual assault, doesn't matter which. That needs to be got rid of. They need to not get that free. There's a motive gone.
Yes.
Then we have criminal injuries compensation money. Our accuser got £12,000 without the case having to be proven. But it just had to be taken seriously by the police, and that's their rule. Well, instead of offering 12,000 compensation, offer them therapy, because the real rape victims, they will love therapy. But the fantasists who want to go to court, no, not so much. They want the money.
Yeah.
That would be a disincentive.
Yeah, so you certainly need to disincentivize situations like that, which leads to a broader question. And I'm not sure if it's unfair to ask you this, but based on your experience, what changes in police work? We're looking right across the spectrum. Police work, prosecution, defense practice, or public perception would lead to outcomes that are fairer and more just for everyone involved when a case reaches court?
I think I have no problem with the accuser being anonymous, unless or until the weight of evidence is strong enough that they could be prosecuted. That's fine. That's how it works. But the prosecution rate for false accusers is something like 0.01% in this country. It's never going to be anything different, because when you think about it, the way the criminal justice system works, as soon as that person has told the police what the crime was against them, they are a witness, and the police are the ones who are pushing the prosecution forward. So when they do that and they don't investigate properly, and when they twist the evidence slightly or manage to ignore the phone evidence that says, oh, she really enjoyed having sex that night and wants it some more, that's the Liam Allen case, for example, then it shouldn't be allowed. But the police should be prosecuted, because they are the ones perverting justice. But they never are, because they're the ones who are responsible for prosecuting. So they're never going to prosecute themselves, are they? It's just never going to happen. So the only ones who get prosecuted are those who are recidivists, people who've done it so many times that it's got the police annoyed, or ones where they're caught, as in quite a lot of taxi drivers have been accused, but they've got wise and they've all installed cameras inside their car. And the camera, when they've gone to interview the taxi driver, he's shown them the footage that's shown this drunk and angry woman storming out without paying, rather than them raping them in the back seat. And that's where we see those convictions happen. But there's 20 to 25 cases a year in Britain, when I've just given the detail that says it's well over 55,000 cases that exist. That's a very low percentage rate.
Absolutely. And when it comes to public perception and the stigma associated with this terrible ordeal, do you have any suggestions how we might be able to address that in terms of awareness?
Well, it's hard to think of anything other than trying to turn around the way the media approach this, because all of the mainstream media are well embedded into the Me Too thinking. They don't really want to tell the stories of the falsely accused. I had plenty of requests after the International Men's Conference speech I gave. I had plenty of requests to be interviewed by journalists, all of which never actually happened.
Okay.
I was told I would be invited up to a studio and that we would speak about this and it would go forward. I can tell you what happened was that those journalists who had an interest took it back to their editors, and their editors went, maybe, but just wait a minute, because there's this much more important story about a pigeon with a funny toe that we can put on first. We'll put that at the bottom of the media's priorities do not include the commonality of the falsely accused. They don't mind the odd one big case,
Right.
like when justice has been so obviously wronged.
Right.
Liam Allen was a good one. Johnny Depp, was another one.
Yeah.
But they don't want to get into, hey, this isn't one or two. This is 30,000 men a year plus getting their lives wrecked. They don't want to go there because that would upset the system too much. That They would get attacked, and they don't want that. So
yeah,
there's a big problem in trying to get that awareness up there. But we do it little by little through online media. The more interviews that we can do like this one, the more the public start to get full of doubt about the misandrist absolute rubbish that gets broadcast every day and repeated over and over again on the BBC, the Guardian, all these major outlets. It's a heavy propaganda program. And ironically, fear of men is deliberately induced by advertising by groups like Women's Aid.
Yeah.
Because they get more money from the government when they've managed to create the fear bubble that makes people want to do something about it. Whereas actually the figures show that there's no increase at all in the number of these sex attacks. In fact, it's slightly reduced in the last 25 years. But Women's Aid make out that it's a stranger danger on every corner. Yeah. And they always go on about the stranger danger, whereas in fact, women who get raped normally, the most common form, it's in their own home or a friend or relative's home, not in the streets at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, you had a Substack piece what seemed to resonate with some people who have been sort of much not hearing much in those terms on the issue. So, what role does public speech and alternative media play in shifting the conversation, and where do you draw the line between advocacy and inflaming mistrust?
Yeah, well, I probably have inflamed some mistrust, but if that mistrust is of the system and feminist sources, I'm quite happy with that. If the mistrust is one that affects innocent people negatively, I'm not so happy, obviously. And if it's mistrust of the system that means that genuine victims, i.e. the falsely accused and sexual assault victims, if they get done down and don't get a chance to have some justice, then that is something I'm very, very keen to avoid. Public speaking, I will always be like I am now with you. It's just straightforward. These are the facts as I see them. I welcome rational argument. I do not welcome hate speech or anything along those lines, or dismissal, people who put forward false propaganda over and over again, thinking the more they repeat it, the more true it becomes, which is what I see from women's organizations, I'm afraid, rather too often.
Yeah.
They have embedded mistrust of men. That's the big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've certainly covered a lot of crucial angles to this really important subject. So now I want to go to just looking for a one-word response
Okay.
from you. When I say a word, just give me a response in one word. What comes to mind when you hear the word acquittal?
Release.
What about false allegation?
Common.
And the justice system?
Failure.
Failure. Okay. Stigma.
pain.
Absolutely. And finally, reform.
Tricky, very
Yeah,
tricky.
I can see that. So we're almost to the end. Just before we get to the last question, I want to give out some further information about our organization. Our phone number is 226-289-8784. Email address is info@voiceofmen360.org. Our website is www.voiceofmen360.org. We're pretty much on all social media platforms, including Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Please join us through any of the above. We encourage your participation by becoming a member through questions or suggestions. We would welcome those as well. So we ask that anyone, whatever demographic you fall under, regardless of gender, social status, whatever the case might be, please engage with us in whatever way you can. We would really appreciate that. So, uh, Patrick, we're almost to the end. We have one final question for you, and basically, it's to ask you if you would want to share any contact information for anyone interested in learning more about your work.
Okay, well, I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, as Aguirre Wrath of God, but it's Wrath of Dog, just to flip that on its head for the full
Right.
title. So that's Aguirre 115622. That's my actual handle. So I'm on there quite often talking about lots of stuff, not just this. But on YouTube, you can find my video, We Believe You, and all the raw interviews with each of the individual contributors, some of which are more in depth and quite interesting. And on YouTube, that's at Patrick Graham 6786. So it's at Patrick Graham 6786. You'll probably find it if you Google We Believe You, Patrick Graham as well. That'll probably take you there as well. So those videos are there, and I'll engage with comments on YouTube videos as well. But yeah, I don't give out my email because I did before and it got flooded. So
Okay.
it's too much. So yeah, I wouldn't. It's not that it's unwelcome. It's just that I can't wade through 1,000 emails. Some people seem to be able to do that.
I hear you. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it's been such an important and critical discussion to have on such a much, I guess, sometimes maligned, sometimes difficult topic to discuss. And with so many abnormalities and injustices involved as well, it's been really good to have you on here. You spoke with wisdom and conviction on a very deserving, often misunderstood, and even at times misguided subject. So thank you ever so much, Patrick Graham, for being our guest on today's show. I'd like to offer a reminder. The Canadian government is gathering public input to improve the health of men and boys. Please take a few minutes to complete the questionnaire. There you go. The link is on the screen. Your input would help shape real change. And you only have one more day, just one more day to do so, June 1st being the deadline. And also, when it comes to the issue of autism, if you're a man caregiving rather for an autistic family member, we're collecting your input rather to shape future men's support groups. The survey is anonymous, confidential, and open until June 30th, 2026. The link is on your screen. And briefly, Patrick, in just a few words, can you summarize what you have come across with today on this podcast?
Well, I'm pleased that you've asked the questions that have got pretty much to the core of where I believe the work has to be and continues to be, to support and challenge the system that creates the problem in the first place, but to support men who have been falsely accused of sex crimes. Because I've seen it. I've been there, and I've seen and been through rape victims in trials as well. And I would say that of the two things, being a victim of rape, terrible, but the idea that being a victim of being falsely accused is somehow not as bad, I would just say, look at those people 5 to 10 years after that event, and you'll see that it is sometimes much worse. That it's easier to recover than, because of systems, support, and everything else, if you're not one of the men that's been falsely accused. There is so little support that people actually find. It's there, but they don't find it. So publicizing what you do, massively important. But you're always preaching to the converted is part of the problem, because the people who are listening tend to be ones who are already found out, and it's getting through to those people who would sooner join a tiki torch parade condemning all rapists than actually going, hang on, there's some truth I've missed here. That's the tricky part. We've got to get through to them. So great to have a chance to do it, and I hope it has some helpful information for other people.
I hopefully it will. You've demonstrated, in a very articulate and convincing way that there is indeed a lot of work to be done. And as we close, men, hear this. Courage isn't just consuming the truth about false accusations, family court, or media narratives. Courage is acting on it. It's reaching out instead of isolating. It's about men and society. This is important, and society as a whole, mobilizing the legal framework, the people, the pressure needed to reshape this narrative, while everyone around you is actually appears rather to be trying to tear it down. However, I want to stress again, it's important to remember that in pushing for fairness and due process, genuine cases of sexual violence must not be sacrificed in the process. That's important to remember. So thank you again, Patrick, and thanks to all of you out there who were tuned in today. We truly appreciate your time and your attention. This is Voice of Men 360 saying, be good to yourselves and others around you. We'll see you next time. Cheers.